Stop being deceived. Have you ever stopped to think that your salary, the reward for your daily sweat, might not be a prize, but a leash? What if I told you that the history of money isn't about prosperity but about control? That from the first payments in grain in Mesopotamia to your digital bank statement, there's an invisible system designed to keep you exactly where you are, working, obedient, and, above all, dependent. In the next few minutes, we're going to unmask the greatest illusion of our society and reveal why the story of your salary is, in fact, the story of a trap. Our journey begins over 5,000 years ago in the civilizations that flourished on the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. In Mesopotamia, the great empires didn't pay their workers with coins, but with something much more visceral: food and drink. Barley, wheat, oil, and especially beer. It might seem like a primitive system, but it was brilliant in its simplicity. By controlling the food supply, the state controlled life itself. A worker who depended on a daily ration to avoid starvation had neither the time nor the energy to question authority. Obedience wasn't a choice, it was a condition for survival. The first salary in history wasn't a symbol of freedom, it was a tool of submission. In Egypt, the logic was the same. The builders of the pyramids, monuments that eternalized the glory of the pharaohs, were paid with bread, beer, and textiles. The system was so efficient that it allowed the state to mobilize tens of thousands of people for projects that lasted for decades. Payment in kind ensured that the workers' purchasing power was always limited to what the state itself produced and distributed. It was a closed circuit, an economy of total control. The message was clear: your labor belongs to us and its fruits return to us. The great turning point came with the Romans. They refined the art of control by introducing the salarium, payment in salt. Salt was a precious commodity, essential for preserving food and, therefore, universally valuable. For the first time, the worker received something that could be exchanged for a wider variety of goods. It seemed like a step forward, a move toward economic freedom. But it was an illusion. The Roman Empire soon realized that if it could mint coins, it could also manipulate their value. And so inflation was born as a weapon of the state. Emperors like Nero began to reduce the amount of silver in the coins, mixing it with less valuable metals. The denarius, the standard coin, looked the same, but its real value plummeted. The Roman soldier, who received a fixed number of coins, found that his salarium bought less and less at the market. To compensate, he had to fight more, conquer more, or go into debt. The state paid its bills with devalued money, silently impoverishing its own citizens and financing its wars on the backs of the population. The trap was becoming more sophisticated. Control no longer came just from direct dependence, but from the invisible erosion of purchasing power. With the fall of Rome, Europe plunged into the Middle Ages, and the system transformed again. In feudalism, land was the source of all power. Serfs didn't receive wages. They had the privilege of cultivating a lord's land in exchange for protection and a small portion of the harvest for themselves. It was a life of hereditary servitude. The lack of a monetary wage tied them to the land more strongly than any chain. Mobility was zero, hope a luxury. But in the cities that were beginning to re-emerge, a new model appeared: the guilds. Artisans and merchants organized themselves into corporations that controlled the production and price of their goods. Within them, there was a clear hierarchy: masters, journeymen, and apprentices. The journeyman received a payment for his day's work, the journey, but the structure was rigid. Ascending to master was difficult, controlled by those already at the top. The guilds, while offering more dignity than feudal serfdom, were still closed systems, designed to limit competition and keep power in the hands of a few. The real explosion, the one that shaped the world as we know it, was the Industrial Revolution. The invention of the steam engine and the mechanization of production created an insatiable demand for labor. Masses of peasants left the countryside in search of a new life in the industrial cities. And there, they found the modern wage in its most brutal form. The conditions were inhumane. 14, 16-hour workdays. Dark, dirty, and dangerous factories. Miserable wages that were barely enough to survive. Women and children were exploited with even lower payments. The worker was no longer a serf tied to the land, but a free man to choose between starvation and exploitation. Freedom was a sham. The wage wasn't enough to accumulate wealth or build a future. It was just the fuel to keep the body running for the next day of work. And to ensure that the workers didn't run away, the factory owners created the company towns, entire cities controlled by a single company. The rent, the food at the store, everything was deducted directly from the salary. The money barely touched the worker's hand. It was an industrial feudalism, where the factory replaced the castle and the wage, the ration. The 20th century brought a new layer of sophistication to the trap. After World War I, the world abandoned the gold standard. Before, the value of money was tied to a physical amount of gold held in the vaults of central banks. This imposed a limit on the ability of governments to print money. Without the gold standard, this restriction disappeared. Governments gained an almost divine power to create money out of thin air, and with it, the ability to generate inflation in a controlled and systematic way. Inflation ceased to be an occasional side effect and became a state policy. A silent and continuous way to reduce the real value of wages and transfer wealth from the working class to the state and to the holders of assets. It was in this context that one of the greatest architects of the consumer society emerged, Henry Ford. Ford shocked the world by doubling the wages of his workers to $5 a day. It wasn't an act of generosity, it was a stroke of genius. Ford understood that to sustain mass production, he needed mass consumption. His own workers had to be able to buy the cars they produced. He wasn't just creating cars, he was creating consumers. But there was a problem. Even with higher wages, a car was still an expensive item. The solution? Credit. Ford and other companies began to offer financing so that workers could buy now and pay later. It was a revolution. Consumption exploded. People had access to goods that were previously unimaginable. The quality of life seemed to have improved drastically. But beneath the surface, the trap was closing in a new way. Debt became the new form of servitude. The worker was now tied not only to his job by the wage, but also by the monthly installments. The fear of losing one's job became the fear of losing one's car, house, and appliances. Credit, presented as a tool of liberation, was actually an invisible chain that bound the individual to the cycle of working to pay. The American dream was financed, and the interest was paid with one's life. This model spread throughout the world. Debt ceased to be just a personal matter and became a geopolitical issue. Entire countries were caught in the same logic. International organizations like the IMF and the World Bank lent money to developing nations, imposing conditions that benefited the economies of the creditor countries. External debt became a tool of global control, a form of financial neocolonialism where sovereign nations were forced to follow policies dictated by their creditors. The trap that began with a handful of barley in Mesopotamia now encompassed the entire planet. From the individual indebted with his credit card to the nation held hostage by its external debt, the mechanism was the same, the promise of prosperity through debt, resulting in a sophisticated form of modern slavery. And then, we arrive at the heart of the machine, inflation as the great engine of inequality. Have you ever heard of the Cantillon Effect? It's an 18th century concept, but it has never been more relevant. Richard Cantillon realized that when the government injects new money into the economy, this money doesn't reach everyone at the same time and in the same way. The first to receive it are those closest to the source, the big banks, the corporations, and the friends of power. They take this fresh money and use it to buy assets, stocks, real estate, gold, while prices in the economy are still low. Only later, as this money circulates, does it reach the hands of the common worker in the form of wages. But by then, the prices of assets have already skyrocketed. The purchasing power of the salary the worker receives has already been eroded. He arrives late to the party and finds everything more expensive. Think of Weimar Germany in the 1920s. While hyperinflation destroyed the savings of the middle class, turning wages into dust, a small group of industrialists and speculators with access to central bank credit bought up companies and assets at bargain prices, building colossal fortunes. The same thing happened in several Latin American countries throughout the 20th century. Inflation is not a neutral phenomenon. It is a brutal and silent transfer of wealth. It is modern alchemy. It turns the sweat of your labor into smoke and the assets of the rich into gold. But the trap is not just economic, it is psychological. The wage system has shaped our culture, our values, and even our soul. From a young age, we are taught to associate success with a good salary. School prepares us not to be critical thinkers or creators, but to be good employees. The education system is an assembly line for the job market. The question, what do you want to be when you grow up, is, in fact, what kind of job will you have? The salary becomes the measure of human worth. A doctor who saves lives in a public hospital is less valued socially than a banker who speculates with abstract numbers, simply because the banker's salary is higher. We are worth what we earn. This mercantilist logic invades our lives, disintegrates community ties, and reduces existence to a cold equation. Even our leisure time is colonized by the salary. The entertainment industry, movies, sports, concerts, is designed for the worker who needs an escape valve from the grueling routine. We consume entertainment, bought with our salary, as an anesthetic. Vacations, dining out, the favorite band's concert, everything becomes a paid reward that, in fact, reinforces the cycle. Because the money we spend to escape returns to the same system that oppresses us. Philosophically, the salary has transformed our perception of time. Our ancestors lived in tune with the cycles of nature. Today, our time is measured in work hours, overtime, time banks. We don't think of time as life, but as a commodity. The question is no longer, what will I do with my days, but how much is my hour worth? The system has robbed us of the right to contemplation, to creation, to simply exist without the need to be productive. And the trap is perpetuated through generations. It is the silent curse that parents pass on to their children. Work, which in theory should free future generations, in practice, only leaves a legacy of more obligations. The mortgage, financed over 30 years, teaches children that adult life is an endless cycle of working to pay bills. Student debt, taken on in the hope of a better future, already puts the young person in the job market with a foot on their neck, rushing to pay off a debt that their first salaries can barely cover. The society glorifies this cycle as an act of love. The father who sacrifices for his family, the mother who gives up her dreams for her children. But what is being inherited is not freedom, but the mentality of servitude. It is the acceptance that life is just that: working, paying, getting into debt, and dying. While the poor inherit debts, the rich inherit assets. For some, inheritance is freedom. For others, inheritance is slavery. Two opposite destinies, born from the same structure. Today, the trap is becoming even more complex and dangerous. Automation and artificial intelligence threaten to eliminate millions of traditional jobs. What will happen when the work that justifies the salary simply no longer exists for a large part of the population? At the same time, we see the rise of the gig economy. App drivers, delivery people, freelancers. Presented as the future of flexible and autonomous work, in practice, it represents extreme precarization. No labor rights, no security, no stability. The worker becomes a micro-entrepreneur of himself, bearing all the risks and costs, while the large digital platforms reap the profits. It is version 2.0 of the company town where the app is the new invisible boss. So, are we doomed? Can this wheel be broken? History shows us that no system of oppression is eternal. Slaves rebelled in Rome. Peasants burned castles in the Middle Ages. Workers founded unions and fought for rights in the Industrial Revolution. Every time the yoke became unbearable, cracks appeared in the system. Breaking the wage trap doesn't mean stopping work. Work can be a source of purpose and fulfillment. It means questioning the structure that turns work into obedience. It means understanding the rules of the financial game that have been hidden from us. It means learning to build assets instead of just selling our time. It means seeking forms of cooperation and creating alternative economies that are not based on perpetual debt. It means, above all, a change in mentality. To stop glorifying empty sacrifice and start seeking true freedom. The one that doesn't depend on a paycheck, a bank, or a government. The wage trap is a mirror of our condition. It shows us how our time, our culture, and our dreams have been bought and conditioned, but it also teaches us that, As long as there is consciousness and will, no chain is unbreakable. The future will depend on our choice. Will we continue to walk docilely on the wheel, believing that the salary is our inevitable destiny? Or will we have the courage to stop, look at the gear that moves us, and decide, together, to break it? History has already proven that the powerful perfect the trap with each generation. The question that remains is, will our generation be the one to finally dismantle it? If you've made it this far, it's because this message resonated with you. You felt the weight of the gear. What was the idea in this video that impacted you the most? Was it the origin of the salary, inflation is theft, or debt is a chain? Let me know in the comments below. Let's start this conversation. And if you want to keep receiving deep analyses like this to expand your mind and break the chains, hit the subscribe button. It's the best way not to miss our next meeting on the journey to true freedom.